Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Fin TV. Today, we're joined by someone who's joined us before, but we're always happy to have him here. This is Neil Ackerman, who is Head of Advanced Technologies, Global Supply Chain, Middle East and Africa at Johnson & Johnson. Neil, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me again. I enjoy working with you folks, and this should be a lot of fun today.
Yeah, it should be. So why don't you tell us, and for those of the people that probably are only just watching you for the first time, a little bit about who you are.
Hopefully, I think I'm like a lot of people. I'm a supply chain person at heart that would listen to the Future Insights group. Right now, I'm a global expat, and I live in Israel with my family. Our team here really focuses on the advanced technologies, the startups, cutting edge work in supply chain that comes out of Africa and the Middle East. And then we work on scouting that technology and then testing it and then scaling it across the globe. So we're really excited about our work here. And generally, we're just really happy to be with you today, Maria, and answer some of your questions. And, people can always catch me on LinkedIn or email me, and I usually try to respond to everyone if I can.
Great, thanks. Well, why don't we just dive straight in, talk about what is covering the news everywhere, which is COVID-19. What's your take on the impact that coronavirus is having on global supply chains?
I mean, overall, I've been asked this a lot, and I would say that I have a nice perspective because I've worked in the US, in Europe, and now in the Middle East and Africa. And overall, I think it's really defined as an overall disruption of the really mechanics of the economy, and how you think about supply chain and logistics in general. Now, I think there's a lot of folks here that can talk about various circumstances and businesses. Overall, if I had to really focus on a couple for this podcast, I'd say that it has a very large food and medical impact. I'm not denying the other experiences of a receding demand of other businesses. I just think that these two have had a very large impact. And as a result of that, I think the mechanics of their economics changes. Now, specifically for pharma, it's minimal disruption for some aspects, but for medical supplies, of course, it's not. And so I think there'll be some longer term aspects to how pharma focuses on generics and active product ingredients, where they're going to be produced and where they're going to be stored. I do not have a crystal ball. I don't know how they're going to reorient this supply chain, but I'm certainly not naive that this is going to be something that will have to be discussed from governments and, of course, from pharma companies and even the consumers and the customers of these products. Related to the food value chain, I really think of it of two things. There's the staple value chain of wheat and corn, and then there's the high end of, let's say, the meat, fish, fruit, vegetable business. Here, I read a lot and spend a lot of time, of course, in these different countries, and it's really about a labor market impact and logistics issue as they focus on the central positioning of the top countries that produce these high value and staples and how that will be reoriented. Now, the question will be, will the world get amnesia and forget about COVID? And I don't have a very good opinion on this. I think that people tend to forget. And so maybe over the short term they won't, but possibly over the long term they may. And then this may be totally wrong with the way I'm thinking about the impact. However, as a person that's in these businesses and understands them, has worked in food, has worked in pharma, has worked in medical supplies and other CPG businesses in many continents and countries, I don't think that they're just going to forget. And there will be some shifting in orientation of these businesses and of the mechanics of the economies that bring them together. I do have one more thing to say on this matter, and that is in regards to other businesses where e-commerce has been impacted. You're going to have lots of folks that have many opinions on this. My opinion is the same as it's been in the past, which is you can't stop the e-commerce train. And this train was going to go this way regardless. The generations of my children no longer go to stores. They haven't, they don't. They've been buying online for years. They think it's ridiculous that I have a cart in a supermarket that is half broken and I run around picking food and then going to a person in the front who then scans all the food and puts all that food back in the cart. When I take the clickety cart back to my car and then empty the cart at my house and put everything away, my children look at me like I'm in the Flintstone cartoon. So it's, if you think about it, the process flow of that is utterly silly. And now that we have seen this happen, it is not surprising that e-commerce is going to take off and stay that way. Now, do people like to go to stores? I guess, yeah, I like to go to the mall, and other people enjoy the social interacting. It's just that not everything will be needed to go to the store anymore. There'll be more ways to use your time more efficiently, and frankly, with more value. I'd rather spend time with you and my friends than go spend 2 hours at the supermarket by myself. I do enjoy going to the mall and buying, let's say clothing and electronics and gadgets and things of that nature, but we also enjoy the social aspect of that.
Well, there's also a mindset shift, isn't it? A mindset shift where we're probably old fashioned. We like to go and touch, the goods and see it. But what this virus has taught us is that we kind of don't need to. We can get on without it. And so what you're saying, if I can paraphrase, is that the e-commerce train isn't going to stop. If anything, this has accelerated that e-commerce train. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, there's always winners and losers at the end. I do think, though, that there is a sad side to that, which is the big brands get really big in this type of environment. And the small brands and the small businesses have a really hard time. When you search on e-commerce, the screen on a mobile phone is rather small. And, that space is the window, right? You can't see it, you don't buy it. And so the search engines are moving towards these big brands for the win, right? And the smaller brands don't have the money to show up on the screen, right? I call it a one-screen world. He who wins the screen wins the sale. It's really simple. And so, I fully understand and empathize very deeply with all the smaller brands and the small businesses that I see all over, especially over Middle East and Africa, that, really struggle in this. And so that's why I also believe that there is going to be this other world that will open up very quickly when people start getting out. Don't underestimate the power of networking and people and relationships. I do think that it is not one or the other. I think you're going to see people are going to strive for connections with people in their communities even more after this. And frankly, I hope they do. So that's what I think about the impact of COVID-19 currently. We can go on for hours on it, but this is generally where my head is at this point.
And Neil, insofar as supply chain design, what kind of changes do you think we're going to see in supply chain because of this?
That is a really hard question because I think it's a reflection of the people behavior and the social changes, which are very difficult to predict. I kind of look at like the prospect of behavior theory, which is people will give more weight to a potential loss than a gain in making a decision. And so we'll tend to overestimate the chances of this unlikely event of a certain disease, continuing to grow and unfortunately impact many people's lives. But following these types of disasters, a tendency would be that you think another threat is imminent. and can be magnified. So as we think about people's behavior and social changes and how they view what will happen next, these feelings will be reflected in people's decisions of placement, of supply that they're going to create, demand that they think people are going to have, and fulfillment and how it's executed. And so it's not so simple for me just to say, oh, I think the design is that they're going to, move distribution centers closer to where consumers are. And I mean, these are common things, or they're going to take the products out of big countries and kind of bring it all back home to their political, environments, and so they could control something. Yes, all that could indeed happen. It also is possible that governments are going to set up what I call medical supply enclaves, not even on their properties, but other countries that they're allies with, just to keep it together in certain allied networks. All this is, written about. But at the core of this design is people. And how people reflect and react will be how this will go. And you don't have to look any further than the huge differences of political parties, and frankly, in Europe and in North America, and how they think about this particular threat, this pandemic. And it will tell you that how they think about it will drive design of a supply chain. Now, of course, no one likes to hear that. They want the textbook answer. Unfortunately, these are the types of things that I believe really require a conversation amongst many stakeholders, because no one is going to have exclusivity on a good idea. No one. So I would love to hear all ideas, and I'm sure you would too. And then eventually, we don't know if it'll be the best one, but we know that we have to pick one. That's just how it works. So we'll see.
I guess that's what's going on in supply chain functions all over the world at the moment. Looking at what's the next step, what we're going to be doing. I like your idea about the fact that nobody has exclusivity on the best idea. We're going to have to try different things. Let's briefly touch upon the supply chain leaders, versus the supply chain leader of the future versus the supply chain leader of maybe yesterday. I mean, up until COVID, I think we were headed in one direction. Post, COVID's really changed everything. So what does the supply chain leader of the future kind of look like?
Yeah, so, you and I have discussed this for a few years now, and we've had many presentations on it. And I've always tried to think about, I don't want to repeat answers from the past. And honestly, I think that this COVID pandemic changed my answer a bit. Mm-hmm. The role of the leader is more important, I believe, than ever, because of the impact of supply chain driving the success of a modern organization. I mean, there are so many times I can tell you I'm at meetings and forums, and people say, oh, supply chain, that's hard and gnarly and messy. And so when I speak to even folks in colleges and universities, it's like, oh, we're going to do marketing because that's fun, and sales, and but now it's like, yeah, that's great, except if you can't do the supply chain, we are like it now.
Yeah.
I mean, we're actually in many ways some of the coolest people there is today. And I've never been cool my entire life. I mean, literally never cool. All that, from never can get a date to, all the way to never having the right clothes. I was never cool. But what happened is, all of a sudden, I wake up now, and the coolest people want to talk about supply chain. Celebrities talk about supply chain. The government talks about supply chain. Presidents talk about supply chain. I don't even know if they know what supply chain is, but they're very excited to talk about it. So you can argue that the future of the supply chain leader could actually turn into the CEO of many companies. And I know that's a very big statement.
That is a very big statement. And I think you and I have talked about this before in terms of supply chain having an image issue. You know, like how many guidance counselors 5 years ago were saying, you know what, kid, you should go into supply chain. Not many, you know, it's not right.
No,
It's certainly not in my school, and I bet not in your school either. But
no,
yet,
no. My children don't even know what I do.
well,
But
exactly.
you know, it's easier when you can show them, but it's harder here. My son asked me, now that the pandemic hit, Daddy, how are you going to load all those trucks when you go to the office every day? And I said, no. And I stopped myself and I said, you know what? You're right. I don't know how we're going to, I don't know how we're going to load the trucks. So what I'd say is this. Um, the supply chain leader is going to have to understand all aspects of the organization, just like they did before. Supply chain leaders know more about the P&L than mostly anyone I've ever met besides a CFO organization. Because, you know, the cost structure is and probably still should be a huge aspect of their life. Because, you know, we're not in the business of losing money. However, they also have to understand internal, external capabilities, because like the job I have now, I'm looking at advanced technologies for supply chain for the future. If there's ever been an example of someone that does transformation of a company end to end, from, you know, everything from raw material to a consumer using it at their home, all those transformational activities and scouting and scaling is in the group I try to represent. And so we focus on all the evolving business models, direct to consumer, omni-channel, you know, the hot terms, but also things that you wouldn't have thought of yet, inventions that are still being created. And there's many examples that are not for this call that I would one day love to share about things that would blow your mind. And it's even beyond self-driving trucks. So
Wow.
So yeah, but that's people already know that. But there's other cooler things. So I also would like to comment two more things, if it's okay on this, Maria.
Yeah, go for it.
The first one is supply chain leaders of the future will be unable to hide from the high level of complexity of the different markets. You see, the global world now is separating people. Right? There's folks that, you know, over the years you could say the right thing, you can do this, you can do that, and you could probably move up and enjoy those benefits. However, now with the complexity and the flat world that we live in, as Thomas Friedman wrote a very famous book, The World is Flat, if you read it, these different markets are showing that they're all really one. And folks that understand different markets, countries, cultures, behavior, the complexity of a supply chain business, the P&L, and then can play between operations, which is core, and you can probably recruit for 80% of that really easily, honestly. It's going to be really hard to recruit and scale for the supply chain transformation that's needed. And you know, this is a fact. Like businesses that were here, you know, 50 years ago are no longer in that top Fortune 100. It is a fact. And we are sitting on the beginning of this long decade plus period where people like me and others are all of a sudden, I can't believe, we may actually become the cool. Now I'll still have my dorky glasses, and I'll still likely not have all the cool things to say. But at least when it comes to supply chain, I won't mess up the P&L. I'll understand the cost structure. We'll make you money, and we'll transform for the future. We'll know what's next. We won't be a bright, shiny object.
Well,
So
listen,
that's what I think.
the day you get groupies, then we know you've arrived, you know, in supply chain. Cool, right?
I don't even know how you define groupies. I mean, if you have thousands of followers on LinkedIn, is that a groupie?
I guess you do. I guess you
Maybe.
must have them. Yeah. But
Maybe.
listen,
I don't know. My wife will
totally.
tell me I'm still a loser, so we're okay.
I tell you what, I think I think you're right with regards to everyone seems to be talking about supply chain now. You turn on the TV, you've got celebrities talking about supply chain. You've got people, my next door neighbors talking about supply chain. Whereas before, when I would have to explain, so I work in this space, you'd say supply chain, people's eyes sort of
Oh
gloss
yeah,
over,
totally.
and know what people don't understand that. So do you think therefore that the supply chain leader has got a real shot, a real opportunity now to really become an integral part, not just a cost center, but an integral part of the decision-making and strategy of a business?
I think supply chain is the revenue generating machine that companies were waiting for. They always thought, oh, I know how to generate revenue. We'll do marketing, we'll sell it. They used to say, pile it high and let it fly. Well, no. The days of people going to stores to seeing piles is shrinking and things are not flying. So now it's about, wait, sweet, those supply chain people, it's not just about cost anymore. Now the big differentiator will be what group of supply chain transformation leaders can build me revenue for a revenue generation. And if you're at the board level and you're sitting there and saying, I know what to do, and you don't have anyone on your board that is transformative specifically in the space of supply chain. I don't mean did a nice Twitter tweet thing or did a TikTok video. I mean, understands that P&L of transformation of supply chain. If they're not on your board and understand the end-to-end cost structure and transformation possibilities, then you're going to lose. And that is going to be part of a diverse and experienced board that I think is going to grow. And so having that future state in mind as part of the team, you will need marketing, you will need salespeople, you will need HR, you will need finance. And in your top three, you're going to need supply chain. Because without it, you're going to go broke. And there's no obvious more example than the last few months. If you can't fulfill, you fail.
Yeah,
that's it.
Well, let's talk about a topic that's really close to your heart, which is predicting demand and essentially demand sensing. So, is it possible for companies to accurately predict future demand when, if you think about now, we're in, we couldn't have predicted this pandemic, or I guess maybe some people could. So is it hard to predict demand with the unpredictable?
Well, first of all, I guess you are right. Some people could. I mean, there's videos showing they did. But ultimately, the majority of those people listened to the videos and then kind of went on their day. It's kind of by human behavior, which is also a different podcast. But can they predict demand against anomalies? So I'm going to go out on a limb, and people may say I'm crazy, but the answer is yes. Navigating the current climate does require new intelligence, resiliency, dependence on advanced analytics, and machine learning. Yes, and by the way, don't take those lightly. Most companies don't even do them. So yes, it does require that. But there's other tangible focus areas when you think about demand anomaly. I've learned that working here in the Middle East and Africa. You can use a lot of downstream consumer takeaway data to really understand that. You could implement demand equations and prediction models and adjust them. You could incorporate social media and geographic impact data in your models. You can use that for a short-term focus and your long-term focus, so you can adjust it quickly. Now, how does all this work? There are many companies that I can't mention names on this call, but there are many, because I didn't get their permission, but there are many companies that are able to take data from social media, from the web, from consumer takeaway traffic, from government sites, put that all together into an AI machine learning algorithm and begin to predict a high, low, medium expectation for demand. And I've seen it myself. I've seen it work. So Yes, there is. And if anyone who says, no, there's no way to use this for anomalies, then I don't want them on my transformation team, because there's no such thing as no. There's a such thing as how, or what if, um, but not no. I do want to point out one thing though here, and that is, um, this is not a game of, let's spend money and get a shiny object in supply chain and say we do machine learning. That's not how this works. Supply chain
Digital
people,
transformation. Yeah, digital transformation for the sake of digital
yeah,
transformation.
supply
Yeah.
chain people generally don't think that way. Generally, we're very pragmatic, very operational type of minds, and I have very rarely seen that happen. I do see it happen in other areas of companies, but generally in supply chain, I have found that they're pretty good at understanding their demand pull, their supply pull, and some good prediction models and a long range financial forecast. So I would say that that's a good measure. And that's why, as I stated earlier, the problem and the combination of what you need to find is folks that have the experience of global markets and financial really understand and understand technology and transformation. There is a certain, sort of important aspect of that. Um, and so this leads to, I think, the second part of your question, which was demand sensing. So for, I don't know, a long time now, you and I and others have been talking about demand sensing. We even wrote an ebook on it. We gave 6, 7 practical pieces for companies to get started on demand sensing. And folks can look it up on your website. You can make the ebook available again. I know you
Yeah.
have it. If not,
Yeah.
I can email it.
I've got it. Yeah.
So, is it a high priority? Yeah. Any company, from the smallest to the biggest, needs to know their demand. So, of course, it's a high priority. It's a future capability that's needed in the near term for forecast and the long term. What is it, right? It basically uses and senses capability and technology that come together with data to create your detailed short and long-term forecasts. Okay? So it will reduce forecast errors, it'll increase inventory accuracy, it optimizes the deployment downstream across your distribution network, and of course your labor allocations. Now, what do I want to add that's different in this discussion? I never really talked about it much, but I actually would like to say that I also think it's a bit of an art. Yes, for a supply chain person to say that, it has some artistic qualities to it. It's not just a science, it's also an art of being creative. You have to really rapidly analyze the data and decide whether to act or not. And that, of course, is an art. And so I think that's an important aspect of demand sensing. Do I think that you always need POS data to get started, which some people don't know is like the end point of sale takeaway data? No, you can use demand forecast, orders, and shipments just to get started. And then, of course, you'll get better as you bring in more pieces of external data. There are many companies, by the way, that do this now. It's not like it was 5 years ago. I mean, everyone's selling it, right? So I'm not selling it. I'm not a company that I work for J&J, but there are companies that do this, and I would encourage folks to get help if they need it. And yeah, so that's what I want to say about demand sensing.
But let me ask you this. I mean, if you just said that demand sensing is critical, it's important. I mean, put it into terms so that other people can understand how important is doing demand sensing. That's number one. And number two, why aren't people doing it?
Okay. How important? I'll say it like this. It's the most elusive and important change in supply chain, where the ability to predict the future accurately could step change your business. That's why it's important. What other technologies in supply chain are important to embrace? Artificial intelligence, which I really think is real intelligence, will revolutionize your processes. Other technologies like advanced predictive analytics, IoT, which is Internet of Things, sensors and robotics for autonomous automation. These are all big watch outs that are going to get moving. Short term, you're going to get really big traction on robotic process automation and process mining. I read some statistic recently that 50% of large global companies will be using AI and advanced analytics by 2023 to improve their transparency and information flows, reduce their friction end to end, try to reduce costs, and enable optimized inventory levels. So all of this will be there. And so what does this really mean? Well, look, it's about democratization. If everybody's doing it, then you're no longer going to have a competitive advantage. Mm-hmm. So you're going to need step change leadership and step change transformation ideas to make this most elusive thing of knowing exactly what people want accurately at the perfect time. You're going to have to build the right skills and teams to do that. And I do think it's not just going to be from supply chain people, it's going to be from cross-functional businesses that come together to unlock what I call the optimization for my consumer experience. Mm-hmm. And so I would say to conclude this call in the new era of supply chain, it's going to all come back to one important thing. And that'll be, what does the customer or the consumer want? And whatever supply chain group, team, leader, organization within a company is the most adept and best to understanding the consumer experience, they'll win. Because if you look at the big companies now that have done it, they did not exist 20 years ago. They all knew that they needed to create the most incredible customer experience, whether it be in digital movies and TV, in books, in retail, in web services, in cloud computing, in technology devices, and now
in travel, in travel, in hotels, you name it. Yeah,
you name it. But where was there a flaw? You know, in many cases, the medical business and the food business was just kind of like, no, we're gonna roll around, we're happy, right? Well, now we've seen the food business is not, gonna be on the side anymore. You know, that whole thing is totally being disrupted. And over the next 10 years, it's gonna be a whole new world.
All right, but answer that part, which is, why aren't companies embracing this technology? Do you think that they're daunted by it? Do you think they don't find it important? What's the reason?
Well, look, I don't know why every company is not doing it, but I will tell you a few opinions. One, you ever think about when things are really hard? If things are really hard, right, and you're going along and you're doing your thing, most people, not all, right, most, so greater than 50%, don't like change, and they don't like to do hard things. I don't know what the percentage is, but let's just say 50% of the companies just don't like change, and they don't like doing things.
Or better yet, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You know, we're plugging along, we're doing well, so why embrace a hard thing when we're okay?
Right. What if we mess it up? What if we put the forecast in and we have a massive problem? You know, I mean, there's articles. I mean, you can name all the lists of what if. And usually when I'm in a meeting and someone says, what if we did this? What if we did that? I always say, that's your anxiety talking. That's what I always say. Literally, I publicly say it. That's your anxiety talking. What if it works great? So, people tend to think on this predictive behavior theory of the negative side. So let's just say let's say 50% of why they don't do it. Well, what would be another reason why they don't do it? Well, probably another 30% to this why we're not doing it is because our industry is different. We're either way too complicated, so this could never do, or we're way too simple. So we don't need to do this. So why bother? Either one. So let's say that's another 30%. And then the other, let's say 10% that aren't doing it, because 10% do it, let's say. Those 10%, and it's a real thing, is, they don't have the resources to do it, or they don't want to put the resources in to do it. And that's real. So, however you break up these percentages, and it doesn't really matter if you agree to the 30, 50, 10, I don't care. These are all legitimate reasons. Cost, my business is too simple, or my business is too complicated. I love those, by the way. It's a silly talk. Or I just don't like change, and I'm not doing this. And my people don't do this, and I'm not hiring, and I don't do this. So, yeah, that's why I think there's lots of reasons why people don't embrace it. But honestly, at the end of the day, what I'm saying to you is no different than business books written by all the top universities in the world. Why did Kodak fail? Right? I mean, it's not like they didn't know about it. What was the reason? Well, they liked it the way it was. Change was hard. They didn't want to invest the money, and their business was really simple. Right? And they're not the only ones, they're just a classic example.
You've got plenty of examples. The Blockbusters of the world, everybody got disrupted, and everybody figures out the disruption afterwards. Hindsight's 2020, I guess, to say, well, we should have done this.
Yeah, but now the data's here. Now I say hindsight, that's no longer an excuse.
Yeah.
Because there's so many, now examples, and you can't say you didn't know. It's this thing called the internet that is out there. And so,
well, the good thing is people are embracing that kind of, I guess, the desire to learn. You're seeing more, at least I'm seeing more people with the title demand planning, within businesses that perhaps you didn't have before. So their conversation is happening. The challenge probably is with the pace of change being so quick. The things changing back and forth. I mean, things like pandemics throwing spanner in the works. What do you say to leaders about wait? People that are saying, well, I'm going to wait and see. What advice do you have for those guys or girls?
Patience is a virtue. So sometimes waiting could actually be in your advantage. I don't know the circumstances of every business and why they would wait or why they wouldn't wait. I think it's more important that they have a strategy that they could articulate that is not based on adjectives, but is based on data. So if they're saying, we want to wait because we're amazingly scared, that's not a reason. If they're saying, we want to wait because our data is demonstrating that right now we're hitting these particular cycle goals, we have this particular margin, there's a lot of reasons.
But
then
valid reasons with data that are supported by facts and data.
Facts and figures. Now, I can make data say anything it wants. I've become very skilled at this. The thing about it is, don't just let the data do it, the talking. Let other people also look at the data, and let's see if they say the same thing. And then you have your answer. So I don't blame people and companies for waiting or not acting. I just think that as long as they have a strategy and it's data driven and they're not using adjectives to describe all their failures and things like, I don't like when people say, our business is going to have the most amazing year. To me, that's like you're wasting every breath and you're wasting my entire time. What I'd rather be saying is our business is going to grow 7.2% this year, driven by X, Y, and Z, blah, blah, blah. This is where I think it needs to go for you to make the decision.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, if you say, I don't know what to do, I'm kind of in this middle, then I do have a position, which is lean in. In other words, when you don't know what to do, dip your toe in the water. I didn't say jump in and make the pool water fall everywhere. I said, put the toe in the water, get a little team together, and do an experiment. The experiment will be worth the time.
Well, that's sound advice. Neil, I think on that note, we're gonna end it here, because obviously you and I can talk for hours about demand sensing and about the state of the industry, et cetera. But thank you so much for joining us on FinTV. We look forward to seeing you at upcoming events that you're going to be speaking at for us, talking about this and talking to other professionals and the work that you do to help further the understanding of demand sensing and essentially the advancement of supply chain. But let's hope you still stay cool for a long period to come. At least we think you're cool.
Well, thanks. I'll try to stay as cool as I can, and hopefully the weather here in Tel Aviv, even though my background is looks like it's a New York background, but I am in Tel Aviv today, and finally it's not 105 degrees Fahrenheit in May, by the way.
Oh,
so
well, good luck with that.
It's reduced a little bit today, so we're okay. But thank you very much for the time, and I'll see you at the next conference.
Yeah, thank you very much. For those of you joining, we'll see you at the next episode of FinTV. Thank you for joining us.